All right, we're ready to get started with the February 26th City of Courtenay Council meeting. So I will be calling this meeting to order, and I'd like to start by respectfully acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. Our first item is an introduction of light items. We need a motion to introduce in-camera resolution, and I'll pass that to Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Acting Mayor. I'll move that we add to the agenda a motion to consider going in camera.
We need you to move the section of the charter.
Yeah, under section 91 sub A.
Thank you. So that was a motion to move in camera under section 91 sub A of the charter. And is there any discussion on, do we need to vote on this? And then we'll bring it back at the end of the meeting, the motion. Okay, great. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. So we can return to our regular agenda for the adoption of minutes. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none. Anyone opposed to adoption? And that's carried. Moving on to staff reports. Our first item tonight is from Operational Services, and it is a report on water conservation, seasonal water use increases, and I will pass this over to staff.
Good evening. Thank you through the acting mayor to the members of council. So the purpose of the staff report and brief presentation tonight is to provide information on seasonal water use in Courtenay and the annual water consumption volumes relative to forecasted consumption estimates. This report includes recommendations for immediate actions to reduce seasonal water demand due to lawn watering and by increasing bylaw enforcement of the Comox Valley Water Conservation Bylaw number 2010. This could include ticketing as an enforcement measure, as well as a recommendation that council support a request to the CBRD Water Committee to consider a bylaw amendment for both stage 1 and stage 2 water restrictions, effectively reducing the total allowable watering hours per week within the Comox Valley. I'll offer that this work was not done in isolation and that CBRD staff were included throughout the development of this report, as well as have been able to provide data to support the report as it's presented to you to council. So quick introduction. Mark Rutten, the General Manager of Engineering Services with the CBRD, is here with us today to support this discussion. If there's any questions that may be related to RD matters, we can have those discussions towards the end of the presentation. So annually, the city is required to forecast its annual potable water consumption and budget for said amount within the water utility financial plan. This forecasted value is based on several factors, including but not limited to year-over-year annual consumption needs or trends, a factor for population growth, environmental changes or contributors, and water conservation strategies or realized reduction measures. Seasonal outdoor water use itself makes up a large part of this total volume, and over the past 2 years, it has accounted for roughly 27% of the city's total water consumption, costing ratepayers approximately $1.6 million in bulk water charges each year. This is an increase of nearly $700,000 from previous years, 22 back to 2014. This increase in seasonal use is a bit unsettling, and staff fear that without corrective actions or measures, that this trend in water consumption could be expected to remain in place and even increase in future years. This type of sustained increase would not only require the city to maintain a projected increase in its annual water budget by nearly $750,000, but it could also mean an increase in capital contributions. Capital contributions would be aimed towards expediting system improvements that may be required to support the increased demand and flows, as well as costly station upgrades, including capital upgrades at the RD level. So for now, this funding increase has been included in the 2025-2029 financial plan, whereby the necessary funds will be recovered through a one-time increase of approximately $75 per household through the water user fee. So this chart depicts water consumption volumes over the past 6 years. Could have done more. It gets a little color complexity if you add too many years. So we narrowed it down to the past 6 years for visualization. This work was really an outcome of the city's progress on the water meter business case study. Staff are completing currently, and they're working through developing that business case for council's consideration shortly. This review found that in 2023, the city had 4 of the highest monthly consumptions, being February, May, June, and August. And in 2024 had 6 of the highest monthly consumptions, being January, oddly enough, April, July, October, November, and December. In 2023, the city's total water consumption exceeded the projected annual budgeted amount by 700,000 cubic meters per annum, which equated to nearly the same amount in dollar values, respectively being 700,000. So that was higher than the budgeted amount. In 2024, the peak monthly consumption in July was just shy of 1 million cubic meters, which is now the highest recorded monthly consumption in the last 10 years. Seasonal outdoor water use in 2023 and 2024 accounted for 27% of the city's total water use, and again, costing on annual $1.6 million in bulk water charges. This slide depicts the pump output for the East Courtenay Reservoir, which is the supply station for the city's 138 meter pressure zone. This includes the Crown Isle Resort Development Area, the Crown Isle Boulevard area, Mission Road area, and the area below Lerwick between Evergreen Drive and Malahat Drive. The blue line shows the consumption trend over a period of 1 day in July, with a comparative trend in January shown in orange. The combined maximum output for this station, or station capacity, is measured in hertz, being 360 with all pumps running. And Mark might be able to tell me exactly how many pumps are in that station that are currently running to meet that. But nevertheless, as you can see, the station nearly reached the maximum output, recording a peak of 357 hertz on July 16th at 5:55 a.m. and at 8:05 p.m. The peak flow period for July 16th, while they generally are in alignment with the sprinkling hours of stage 2 restrictions, the sheer volume of water that's leaving the station at that time is quite substantial. As this trend has been continuous and repeatable year over year, the CBRD has considered pump station upgrades within the 2025 financial plan to meet the demands of this pump zone. Comparatively speaking, this slide depicts a data set from the Buckstone subdivision development, which is in South Courtenay. Again, 2 comparative days. Point of reference, the Beechwood Booster Station is the only distribution feed into the Buckstone development area. So it's a single source feed into a new greenfield development area. So we were able to track these flows quite accurately based on development. Similar to that of the Crown Isle Station, you'll see that this graph depicts water flow for a period of time. In this particular day, we chose July 20th and a comparative day of December 2nd. This is depicted in liters per second rather than hertz, as we have the flow monitor data specifically from the station. So the pump station itself has 3 domestic pumps and 2 fire pumps to supply fire suppression if required. On July 20th, to meet the outdoor irrigation demand, 1 and at times both of the fire pumps were in operation for a period of over an hour, both in the morning and in the evening, to meet the irrigation demand for this area. So where do we stand? In the Comox Valley, under stage 1 restrictions, residents have the ability to water their lawns up to 18 hours per week. And under stage 2, this is reduced to a total of 8 hours per week. Comparatively speaking, in Metro Vancouver, under stage 1 restrictions, lawn watering for automatic sprinklers in particular is limited to just 2 hours on Saturday for even numbered addresses and 2 hours on Sunday for odd number addresses, for a total of just 2 hours per week. And lawn watering is not permitted under stage 2. In the Cowichan Valley Regional District, under stage 1 restrictions, lawn watering is limited to 2 hours per day, 2 days a week for a total of 4 hours. And under stage 2 restrictions, it's 2 hours a day for 1 day a week. So in closing, the staff report recommends the council fundamentally support enhanced enforcement measures, including ticketing throughout the summer months by using bylaw services in collaboration with our ambassador program, as well as a recommendation to endorse the request for the CVRD to consider reducing the total amount of irrigatable time, both under stage 1 and stage 2, by up to a third, with consideration for further reductions in future years. With that, I'm happy to take any questions council may have.
Thanks for that report and the presentation, and thanks to Mark for joining us today as well in case there's questions in his realm. We have, I think this is Councillor Frisch up first.
Yeah, thanks, Acting Mayor. Thanks for the presentation, Kyle. A couple background questions. So what is stage 1 for us right now? Does that allow people to do?
Yeah, so stage 1 currently allows people to water their lawns up to 18 hours per week with odd and even days, with only no watering on Mondays. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Actually, if I just go back, you can see it there. And then stage 2, it's restricted down to 4 days a week.
Right. And I presume when we're in stage 1, it's maybe not hot like it is when we're in stage 2. And so do we know what the outcome is if we say to people, you can have stage 1 and it's blazing hot out? Are they still going to water like crazy, or, does it ease up because we give them every day of the week?
So right now, the restrictions at the CVRD level are staged to start in a timestamp. So every year, starting on May 1st, we activate the stage 1, and then, comparatively speaking, I think it's on July 1st, stage 2 are there. There's a fairly broad amount of time for people to use water within those restrictive hours. And I think that's partially the issue, is that they're utilizing as much of those times that are available rather than per se using a short amount of water within the allotted time, as it were said.
Right. So what would it mean if we brought it down to 2 hours like they do in other communities? Does that change the situation at the tower and the pumping and the infrastructure needed? Like, is 2 hours a short enough time that we wouldn't have to like upgrade all our stuff?
Yeah, and I can let Mark jump in on that as well. And I think the concern is right now, because the systems are strained, that restricting the water restrictions to a specific time of day would only compound the issues that we're currently seeing. What we're recognizing through some of the dialogue and through discussions with other organizations, that is still providing a broad range of time for people to utilize water and watering, but limit the duration to each individual to 2 hours per se, but over a broader period of time, so that we're not constricting all of the demand on the stations and the reservoirs and the pumps within a short period of time, which could cause undue stress.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor McCollum. This is very concerning, not only from a water conservation perspective, but from an equity perspective in relation to cost. It sounds to me like residents who don't abuse watering and don't use a lot of water are actually paying more for residents who do. Would that be safe to say?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Through the acting mayor, Councillor Hillian, that's correct. It's because it's everybody pays, it's user pay across the board, and everybody pays the same. So the increase that's expected to cover the total bulk water consumption is broadcasted across the entire user fee.
Right. So I wanted to ask about enforcement and what's proposed in the on page 1 of the report under education and outreach. It talks about when there's a complaint or there's an area where we know that restrictions are not being followed, notices are hung on the doors or there's a mailing. It sounds like 2 notices are hung on the door. And then if there's still a problem, somebody goes and speaks to them. So that's like 3 warnings. And then there might be some enforcement. And so what are we proposing now? Because that to me seems overly lenient. And I'd just like to contrast that with what's being proposed now.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. Through the acting mayor again to Councillor Hillian. Maybe I'll start and I'll pass the mic to Director O'Connell. The approach first and foremost is education and outreach, as it always has been. As you can see, some of the issues that we identified is the sprinkling hours that exist are outside our operational hours. So it's unlikely for us to catch them unless we're out specifically at 7:30 first thing as we start, and then we see them tailing off in terms of that, or we're out looking for wet pavement in an area that would otherwise not be within a sprinkling zone based on those restrictions. So that's the first issue that exists. The other one is education and outreach, first and foremost, always seeking to see compliance from a voluntary perspective. However, that's just from an ambassador's perspective. So the first place that it starts is with us in operations. And if we fail to see compliance, then we afford the address and the complaint to bylaw services. And oftentimes, and I'll let Director O'Connell speak to that, but it starts again, first and foremost with education and outreach, request for compliance before ticketing. So in the report, it's articulated that there hasn't been an issuance of ticket in terms of the city in quite some time.
Okay, and I think what you're saying is part of the problem is unless we're there in the middle of the night, we can't actually prove that they're doing it. Is that the problem?
Agreed. Really inaction, right? And I think Director O'Connell could speak to the enforcement of ticketing with respect to conservation bylaws.
Thank you very much. And I can definitely confirm that the transition that's being proposed in the report is really to have bylaw involved earlier. Part of the component with the current ticketing is unless my bylaw officers are the ones that are doing the investigation, technically the bylaw investigation process, which is how we start with that approach of the warnings, hasn't necessarily started. It'd be similar to someone finding out about a regulation through any other less formal means that aren't bylaw compliance. At the same time, with the data that Director Shaw's team has been able to provide, this will allow us to clearly look at those areas that are through the evidence itself showing that they're watering outside of the permitted time, specifically up in the Buckstone development or the Ridge development. And with that, we've been able to work with the operations team to identify the funding that would be required in order to facilitate the overtime and do some shift adjustments in order to have those conversations and have them be effective, whether it's to get the voluntary compliance with an actual conversation with someone's home as opposed to a door hanger, or actually issuing a ticket in the event of continued non-compliance. This will be done in tandem with an enhanced communication awareness campaign leading up to each of the water restriction phases. That way we can also rely on the fact that we've done a lot more public notice around the expectation that folks are compliant and that our officers will be out at times and on days when they typically haven't been historically, and folks can expect to see them on their doorstep in the event that they're watering outside of the permitted hours.
Thanks for that. Oh, and we have Mayor Wells online. Go ahead.
Thanks, Acting Mayor McCollum. I appreciate it. I heard you chatting about comparators with other communities, but I couldn't see that data in the report, so I might have just wasn't able to find it. But I wondered, is that something that is in here, or will be coming forward with the report on water meters?
That's a great question. Thank you, Mayor. It wasn't specifically articulated in this report. Some of those comparative metrics were sought after the report was published for sake of the conversation and presentation today. So we can definitely provide that information as an update. And certainly in consideration that the water metering business case is incomplete just yet, we can certainly provide that information for council's consideration upon receipt of that.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, I just had a question to add in as well, around this 27% figure is fairly closely connected to seasonal water use. Are we looking at metered seasonal water use with that figure, or are we just analyzing our unmetered use? Because we do have a fair number of institutions, commercial school fields in that area, and I'm just trying to get a sense of whether or not that 27% is being spread across our flat rate users, or if some of that is actually being billed according to usage.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Acting Mayor. You're right. The data, in the absence of universal metering, it's hard to articulate specifically what's attributed to lawn sprinkling and residential use. So to answer your question, yes, it is broadly across the entire user group. And so you're correct in that the assumption is that there is increased use as a result of the summer months through both our commercial, our industrial user groups, inclusive that of ourselves in parks and irrigation. Um, it's some of the interesting facts and figures that really came out of the business case analysis and really what drove much of this conversation. And I think I asked the same question through the analytics of this process was like, we have to use some numbers to try and explain it, and it's not a one-to-one relationship. Comparatively speaking, for example, and hopefully this helps clarify a bit, from 2015 to 2023, our consumption has increased on a population base by 34%. So over a 10-year period, we've seen a 34% increase in water consumption based on, and that number is linear to that of our growth. So just because we're using more, we're also growing more. The number that's troubling, and so that's the average day demand or the base load demand, and that's how we do liters per capita per population. So like, for instance, in 2015, our base demand was 375 liters per capita per day. And today in 2023, it's 390. So it's only about a 15 liter per capita per day difference. It's our peak demand that has extremely changed. We used to be at around 582 peak demand for liters per capita today per day, and now we're at 928. So we've seen a 59% increase in our seasonal usage over a period of 10 years. And that's where you're seeing it in those charts where it's exponentially increased in terms of that finite period of time in the summer months when we're using the majority of the water. And we're seeing peak months come out to 1 million cubic meters in 1 month for our community.
And I suppose that's also an indication that people are complying with the watering hours, is that we're seeing that concentration during peak times, is that in a sense that is demonstrating compliance with our restrictions that we currently are using.
Agreed, to a degree. And I think those two line graphs really depicted that is showing clearly within the confines of the restrictive hours that people are using. It's the quantity and the duration of time that they're using it. They're using the restrictions to the fullest extent of the restrictions. And that's why the second fold of this is not one only to just look at ticketing and enforcement, but a reduction in the availability and amount of time that folks can actually water their lawns specifically.
Yeah, and so the one question I had around that is if we're, and I certainly understand the rationale of moving away from just these restricted points in the week to a restricted number of hours, is that, so we're not getting these like focus peaks. But would that not make it much more difficult to understand when people are complying and, you know, in terms of setting their timers and, you know, there's a bit of policing that I think goes on between neighbors in terms of that knowing when people are allowed to water and how long sprinklers are allowed to be on. And I'm wondering how much confidence we have that changing the schedule will lead to fewer hours of watering for lawns.
It's a fair question. Thank you, through Acting Mayor. What we know, and I have faith in humanity, what we know is that most people want to follow the rules. And I think it's articulated in some of these graphs that people are using it within the confines of their availability. And you're right, there is a bit of community policing, but there's also an emphasis on our bylaw staff and to engage residents to ensure that they're, using the water that's appropriate within the timeframes. And it would take a little bit more time for sure, especially through those investigative processes that Director O'Connell spoke to. But for the most part, people want to follow the rules, and that's what we found historically. And we would trust that that would be in the best interests of our community in terms of our overall consumption, and usership would likely drop.
Okay, thanks. Great answers. Director Hillian, or sorry, Councillor Hillian.
Thanks. Yeah, two questions. I'm curious about the off-peak months where we saw exceptional amounts. Do we have any analysis on either of those?
That's a great question. It's interesting. So harken back to 2020 numbers, if you can see that on the map right now, that was COVID. So you can see a slight increase in March when everybody was at home. And then it kind of stayed fairly on the low end of everything through the entirety of that year, which is quite an interesting statistical anomaly. In terms of off peaks, I know that some of them are seasonally based. For instance, 2023, we saw a very, very dry spring. There was not a lot of rain, and so you see a high increase of water use and consumption in February, which was unlikely. And so we're seeing this change in the environment in which that we live in today from year over year. We're seeing droughts, extended droughts, and people are taking the opportunity to utilize water to to fulfill that need that otherwise the environment didn't necessarily provide in terms of a spring pickup. As I spoke, earlier today as well, exponentially we're growing as a community. We're seeing residents move to our community. The growth is there. And so some of these numbers, retrospectively, when you look back, they seem to be off-peak increases. And the reality is that our demand as a whole is increasing on a per annum, and starting to see those numbers increase in our off-peak times or off months.
Thanks. The other thing I was curious about, I don't know if there are any people who've been identified as frequent abusers. We have no data that is being presented on ticketing, but if there are situations like that, is there any possibility of compelling metering on an individual basis, or does it have to be done on a wider scale?
I think I'll defer that response to Director O'Connell.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hillian. It's a wonderful question. We can seek different types of compliance orders, so depending on how challenging an individual may be. At the same time, we have the ability to ticket for every single occurrence. And we're currently reviewing a lot of our ticket and fine amounts as we transition in preparation for adjudication. So if we find that, say, for example, ticketing or watering outside of the available hours is $100 fine, and we're not seeing that being effective as a deterrent, that's when we would start increasing the fine. If someone is watering outside of the permitted hours every single day, they would receive a ticket every single day. So it does accumulate over time.
Thanks for that. And Councillor Morin.
Great, thank you, Acting Mayor. So I know that we're only looking at lawns, but we also hear anecdotal feedback that people are washing vehicles and boats and driveways, and sometimes, making sure those driveways look like they were first put in. Hours and hours sometimes of meticulous attention to these things. And I guess I'm wondering why we wouldn't be including those kinds of activities as well.
That's a great question. Thank you. Through the Acting Mayor to Councillor Morin. It's really about total volumetric amounts. The lawn watering far outweighs the amount of water that might be used to water or wash a driveway or wash a car or a boat. There's also thought and consideration to the business models that exist within our community. Some people offer those services for charge. And so adding restrictions around those could potentially impact those that are using that as a business model to support themselves and their families. So the focus really is on the wasteful water in terms of that. And lawn watering is the highest in terms of that. We certainly wouldn't want to impact those that are growing vegetables in their yard or are using drip irrigations or other areas or other mechanisms of irrigation that are very reasonable in terms of the amount of water that they're consuming on any one given day or any one type of application. But lawn watering is by far the greatest adversary that we're trying to attack in this particular scenario.
Thanks. Just a supplement, if that's okay. Yeah, actually, I was gonna bring up food gardens, so you anticipated that. I wouldn't want people being penalized for watering their food gardens. And then just another piece around the fines. So are we giving, like, what kind of repercussions are we, yeah, what kind of consequences are people now? Do we have anybody who's getting kind of hit hard by our current model?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's in, if I recall, I think Director O'Connell alluded to that it's about $100 for the first violation, and I think it escalates thereafter. And I think it also varies on deliberate or, not deliberate, like, so
Mhm.
was it a mistake? So it's a minor initial fine, or was it deliberate and intentional as knowledge has already been passed on through education outreach to an individual? And then based on the stage, there's escalating factors as well. But I have to refer specifically back to the CBRD's bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Fresh.
Yeah, thanks again, Acting Mayor. I'm looking at these graphs and maybe I'm just not quite, I'm struggling to understand how we're gonna affect these two peak graphs. I kind of note, and maybe you saw this, like in the mornings, there are a bunch of people starting early, and in the evenings, not so much. And I think that's obviously because it's easy to get caught in the evening, whereas at 3 in the morning, they know no one's going to catch them. And I wonder if we suspect those people are starting at 3 and continuing on till 8 or 9. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. And are we looking at like squishing that down to 2 hours, and will that make a significant difference? I'm still struggling to see, like, if we just say 2 hours and everyone follows that, just 2 hours, is that going to solve the peak demand issue?
Yeah, it's a fair question. Thank you again through the acting mayor, Councilor Frisch. I don't think I have an answer for you today, and I think that's part of the dialogue that is required through consultation with CBRD staff and the recommendation to seek an opportunity for the CBRD and collectively the city to come together and come up with options and opportunities that may be sought to answer the question that you just asked. The off-peak times are the most appropriate times. Other jurisdictions are specifically attacking lawn watering, as in the Cowichan Valley Regional District, specifically in terms of hours or durations. But you're right, it's a conversation that we've had staff at the CBRD around how exactly best to manage and tackle this. And I think that's why in this report you're not seeing it, because we don't want to particularly suggest that there is a right way or a wrong way to do that. It's going to take some analysis and some modeling to understand what exactly is the most effective and opportunistic way to see the greatest success for a reduction. And that might be a staged approach. It might be focus on, upfront education and outreach. It might be a focus on duration of hours. It could look like a complement of many of those items. But I think starting the conversation, providing this information, and engaging with our regional partners is important to find a potential solution to an issue that's in front of us today.
No, thanks. That sounds like a really wise approach. The other question I just want to clarify, if we move this, we're asking for increased resources for enforcement. Can we expect then that we'll have people out at 4 in the morning driving around, seeing what kind of watering habits are happening? Is that kind of what we're aiming to do? And I think that actually would make a lot of sense, because if we can change those habits right off the bat, we could maybe see what effect that has.
It's great.
Is that indeed the plan?
Yeah, I'll defer to
Yeah.
Director O'Connell to answer that directly.
Thank you very much, Councillor Frisch. Yeah, so this is a work in progress in the sense that we're working with the ops team to identify what would be the best strategy, and then working with our officers themselves to either shift shifts within what we're allowed to shift them in the collective agreement within their schedule, but also looking at whether or not we can accommodate it with some overtime hours as well. Overtime hours are not necessarily things that we can compel staff to do, although they are very attractive. So I'm not concerned about whether or not we'll be able to get staff to do those extra hours. We also have to consider the implications of potentially knocking on someone's door at 3 or 4 in the morning, as opposed to dinner time when they may be watering outside of the hours during a time when we can expect them to be both home and awake. So we're still kind of navigating those pieces. I would imagine the way that we start is through that more aggressive communication campaign, start with some of the evening ones, and then if it's necessary, we'll go to those early morning times as well, but they are more disruptive and impactful and more likely to lead to conflict, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to create any conflict. I mean, you could also wait till 8 o'clock before you knock on the door. I mean, you can let it slide for a few hours. So thanks for that.
Thanks for those questions. And Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Acting Mayor. I was just gonna, at this point, move option one, but I was gonna say maybe if you're going out at 3 or 4 in the morning, perhaps take a photograph with a timestamp and come back 4 hours later. So this is what this is, rather than knocking on doors. But I'd like to move option one at this point.
Moved by Cole Hamilton, seconded by Frisch. Any further discussion on that? Councillor Moran.
Thank you. So, so this recommendation allows for how one warning to, isn't it 2 warnings and then enforcement? I just want to get clarity on that.
Thank you very much. So unlike my colleague to my left, it's not a number. It's typically more related to the scenario itself. So typically with 2 warnings, that would be a situation where perhaps they were away on vacation and they had set their timers, forgot that something was transitioning. Then we catch them again and maybe something broke or there was another reason. If it is intentional or non-compliance, it can be a single conversation and then a ticket. If it is intentional non-compliance and they refuse to turn their sprinkler off in that moment, it could also be an immediate ticket. So it really depends on the individual's response to when they become aware that they're acting contrary to a bylaw. So if there's a reason why and it's reasonable, we are take a more education-based approach. If it is overt and they're just simply disregarding the bylaw, the first conversation could result in a ticket if that's the attitude.
Mhm. Yeah, fair enough. I understand that. I guess I would hope that the education and awareness piece would not be on numerous, I mean, I wouldn't want that to be the sole focus for folks who are, yeah, repeat offenders, basically. That the focus would be more on the enforcement.
And just, I think I'm understanding where you're going with this. Say, for example, we issue a ticket to one individual in beginning of June, and then we catch them again 3 weeks later. It's not, the process doesn't start again. Once they've been spoken to that first time, that is their first time. And anytime, even if it's a month later or 2 months later, that's the continuation of the same infraction. So it doesn't, it's not like it resets every single time we catch them. You get that one warning or that first conversation, and then it's ticket. You do it again 3 weeks later, it's a ticket right off the bat at that point.
Okay. I'm still, yeah, I mean, I'm still struggling a little bit with it, but I think my colleagues are, I just feel like it's more problematic. And I understand that it's difficult because people are watering at weird times, but maybe it's an early morning because if they are starting at 3, they're probably still watering at 5. So maybe instead of 3 in the morning, you're going at 5 in the morning or something like that. But yeah, I guess the other piece is we are getting the water metering report, excuse me, and I know we can't jump ahead to that even though I want to. And I'm hopeful that, when we have that conversation about metering, that we will be having some focus on those problem areas of the community where we are seeing those higher increases. But I know that's a conversation for another day. Thanks.
Did you want to add something?
I do want to extend the conversation. However, this is, we're kind of dealing a little bit in hypotheticals. My experience in enforcement is that when the messaging is out, there's a lot of pressure by neighbors to deal with it. I could tell a story whereby I did receive a notification. It happened to have been my neighbor that was doing the thing, and I engaged with the town of Comox on this. And so I've experienced it, and I think it's a pretty well done process. The CVRD does the enforcement, I believe, for the town of Comox, based on the information that we had. And so I think the process should unfold. It's an obviously very significant issue, and we'll be very live to it. And council was very clear in a great deal of conversation when we were doing our midterm check-in on the strategic plan to make sure that we address this. And so I would envision this as our step, and we've got a few more things underway. This will be even more important depending on what this coming summer is like. And these are the kind of things that reinforce and you build that as we go forward. But I think it's an important first step. But I think staff is hearing quite clearly the concern level of council and how we should be approaching this change in enforcement and then future enforcement activities.
Thanks for those comments from our city manager. And with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes. Okay, moving right along to notice of motion. This was submitted by Councillor Jolicoeur, who's not here. So perhaps we don't actually need the motion. It's on the agenda, so we could probably carry on, or do we need this spoken to?
No further action is required. The motion appearing on the agenda is notice has been provided, and it'll come back to the next council meeting for council's consideration at that time.
Okay, thanks for that clarification of procedures. In that case, we'll just skip ahead to the 2025 to 2029 financial plan follow-up, and I will pass this to staff.
Thank you. Through the acting mayor to council. Staff report in front of you reflects a great deal of work on a joint effort between staff and council. Mr. Langemar is going to speak to the staff report, and we have a series, we have some recommendations for you as it relates to the financial plan and direction that we've received previously, and then subsequently our bylaws. Staff are here in a team to answer questions, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Langemar.
Nice to be here once again. So this is actually kind of an interesting report to prepare for council. It was nice there was very pointed direction. So I'll talk through some of the areas. There's a lot of data in the report. I want to highlight the tax change scenarios. So council requested the tax change scenario at 6, 6.5, and 7. Once we had taken into consideration the changes we were able to do and the changes directed by council, when I was performing the analysis, each one of the tax change scenarios and a utilization of surplus landed in a reasonable area. One of the pieces I had a challenge with is, what recommendation do I bring back to council with this? So the financial plan that's presented before you includes a tax change scenario at 7%. The rationale behind that is it really softens that next year's taxation increase, and that seemed to be a bit of a trend I was picking up through council. The next piece I wanted to chat about is the sewer frontage fee change. The financial plan as presented has the sewer frontage fee changing in a single year. Council did request information about a 2 or a 3 year phasing of the frontage fees. After I did the analysis of that, it wasn't. The sewer fund is not in a financially incredibly strong position to absorb that change. In 2025, the sewer fund is relying on surplus to balance. This is a result of the larger utility increases in solid waste and the choice to defer sewer rate changes in 2024 to really try to smooth that taxation and utility change year over year. In the analysis, the 2 year implementation or 3 year, and even the 1 year still leaves the overall unappropriated surplus in the sewer fund below any of our optimum balances. And I couldn't make the recommendation to make a change given our substantial capital plan and sewer occurring in 2027, about 17 million, along with the regional district's capital program for the sewer conveyance projects going along. You know, the regional district represents 53% of the sewer fund's total expenses, and we don't have strong control over the actions there, and we know there's risk in cost overruns in that project. One of the final pieces I want to wrap up is there was a significant change to the amounts of funding coming out of gaming. The bridge building demo project was removed from taxation, transferred into gaming for 500,000. Looking at the impact on gaming, the gaming fund is still within it exceeds its 1 year of gaming revenue on hand. It's at about $1.7 million of accessible money. Our target's 1.2, so it is safe. Looking forward, there isn't a substantial change in that balance as the bridge building demolition is a one-time item. And the only other ongoing item is funding for the CRA for the Evergreen Senior Association program that was historically funded by taxation for $48,000. Staff is making the recommendation that turns and is funded from gaming. With that, I want to bring Council's attention to page 7 of 8, where I wrap up all the changes on an average residential dwelling. Given the 7% taxation change scenario and the 1 year frontage change scenario, the expected change in taxation for an average home is $276. This has been reduced from the January 29th and February 5th information of about 331. And the overall percentage change is sitting at about 8. It is an actual reduction from last year. Last year, we saw about a $332 change in the average home. But looking forward to 2026, we still have work to do if we want to bring down future changes. And with that, I'm welcome to hear any questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Adam, for the report and the explanation. I know I understand it's probably a fair amount of work in a short period of time to make these adjustments for us. So just want to appreciate you and your staff for that. And I'll pass this to Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Adam, for all the work that's gone into bring this back to us. We've talked a bit about the sort of the bump or the kind of the bow wave is the expression used, that if you lower this year, then you've got a steeper hill to climb for next year, to add another metaphor. And when I look at that graph you were referring, the chart you were referring to, it has 7.47 for last year, 7 for this year, 12.2 next year, and then 6.3, and then it's actually 5.5. I guess I'm wondering why that bow wave has to be all absorbed in one single calendar year, given that we have reserves and we have surpluses and we have other ways which we use often to smooth out increases. It's just obviously, as you can imagine, like to be facing a 12.2% increase next year. I'm just wondering if there are other ways, again, to smooth out that increase over the course of the financial plan rather than eating it all at once in 1 year.
Part of the challenge is decisions of past years of making deferrals. So one of the items I wanted to understand this better, like why was 2026 such a big push? And on page 4, I identify some of the items that are pushing that 2026. It's increase in taxation funded portion of capital projects. We're spending 2.5 million of current year taxation on capital. Part of the reasons for that is reserves aren't built up to where we could be relying on reserves to do that. Part of council's direction at the February 5th is to look at what could be done. We might come back to the recommendation saying, if council wants to reduce the current year tax or the 2026 tax increase, we recommend X, Y, and Z capital projects be funded from reserve instead of taxation. We might balance bringing reserves a little bit lower than we desire. That's okay because we know we're kind of smoothing that wave out. So that's one approach we could take. Another piece is debt that we've taken on. We're starting to have to pay for this. And so those are items we can't push. That's a obligation. Two other items that are hitting are the fleet transfers. Our fleet reserve is starting to diminish with the increasing cost of vehicles. And then continuing with the SIP reserve transfer. Those are all items I could specifically identify. And then we have just inflation on $55 million of spending. Those are some of the items. With regards to how we could smooth it out using other things, in the kind of the assumptions I built in, I'm using 5% of total wages in the general fund being drawn from reserve right out of the bat. So I'm trying to establish a baseline. We know we have turnover. We know we don't want to tax assuming 100% of our positions are filled all the time. What can we do to address this? So by bringing in 1.2 million of surplus into the financial plan as our baseline, that kind of makes some smoothing there. You know, as we get closer to 26, we'll have more focused numbers and we could make a recommendation to either increase or decrease depending where we're at.
Is there no other lights? Okay, that's cool. Thank you. So then, and I believe in the past meeting, it was said that we just don't have the data we need in order to be able to put an accurate number on what's 95% or 97% or 96% of the year that we want to account for. But that adjustment will happen, and the current numbers we're looking at are based upon 100%. So is that correct? So when we go to make that adjustment, the amount of front filled positions will decrease. Is that correct from what's currently here?
So what is currently here, if you look to page 3 of 8, kind of in the middle, I show the 2026 revenue requirement. And in there, we have the impacts of the council decisions from 25 following through the 26. So that would be the elimination of a staff position and some of the other changes. We have the estimated non-market change to the new taxation. You know, that might be a bit more. And then we have the proposed surplus use. And so the proposed surplus use is a baseline at 5% of total wages in 2026. So it's already taken into consideration. That being the baseline, we're looking at about a surplus utilization of around 1.67 million this year. So there is flexibility for council next year to still make adjustments.
Okay, thank you. And I know that that this assumes that taxation funded portion of capital at 2.5 million. That's of course is a decision which we would make during next year's budget process to whether we wanted to take such an enormous amount of funds out of current taxation. Okay, well that certainly helps to put the 12.7 for next year in perspective in terms of what can be done to work with that bow wave from any actions we take today. Maybe I'll yeah, that's what else.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Well, I like the recommendation on the frontage tax. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, if we're going to have to increase it no matter what, and maybe just biting the bullet this year is the right thing to do. And then I like all the work you did to make those changes, and inclined to support a 6%, although a 7% doesn't really bother me that much either. But also noting that, you know, the reason every year it seems like a big jump is because the year before we only did a small jump, and then we kind of got to make up for that to get where we want to go. So I guess I'm happy with the report, happy to support the recommendation or something very close to the recommendation, depending on what the rest of council wants. And look forward to that conversation about what we're going to do for next year to make it palatable for council members and obviously the general public. So thank you very much.
Thanks for those comments, and we'll go to Mayor Wells online. Go ahead.
Thank you, Acting Mayor, and much thanks for running the meeting for me tonight. I'm quite glad we made that decision. Yeah, I mean, really appreciate the report. I guess it is a sort of predictable bow wave that we see going forward. So I'd probably be inclined to look at the higher amount so that we reduce that. And then also, you know, we've have a very focused perspective and plan to come back in May and really look at the budget in a like a more wholesome way for the 2026 year. So yeah, feel as comfortable as we can. Thanks.
Thanks for those comments. And Councillor Moran.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. Yeah, I think everyone's worked really hard. I know every department has sharpened their pencils and done what they can to shave off as much as possible. And I'm inclined to support the recommendation. I guess just we had the motion around, excuse me, looking at the plan for next year and looking at possible revenue streams and things like that. Excuse me, I'm really paraphrasing because I don't remember the wording of the resolution exactly. And I guess I'm wondering when that process would start, because I think May is far too late, obviously, when we're when we're getting into the thick of things. So anyway, I'm just wondering when we're going to start that work, because it is a concern when you see that 12% for next year. Like, I really want to get a head start on looking how to mitigate that. Thanks.
I'll pass this to our city manager to
Thank you,
answer.
through the acting mayor. Appreciate the question. We have to have some more certainty on our actual costs before we start to look at that. So I would suggest introducing this and workshopping this is 3 months earlier than we ever have. We did get some pretty clear direction, and I can assure you that your staff group have already started the process to look at 26. We are going to propose revisiting our strategic plan to make sure that we're in alignment. And that work will happen, I would say the earliest that it can start to happen is in May, but we have started already to look at the biggest driver of this, which is our capital plan, as well as the underlying projects that we undertake on a regular basis. There are perhaps is some change in work program that can be undertaken. There were some big decisions made yesterday at the Regional District Board. Some of the work in our Development Services Department may no longer be the work of the Development Services Department, depending on the future of some of those services. So we're already projecting forward on that. But I do offer that I would say realistically, engaging with council before May probably would not be possible, just from a practical sense.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I know May is coming up quickly. I guess what I just think that the conversation starting in May is great, and summer is busy, and then we're into fall, and then it's budget time before we know it. So it sounds like there's a good plan in place for that. Thanks.
Thanks for that question. And Councillor Hillian.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll support the recommendation. I just want to put on record that there will be people in the community who see this as still excessive. And we experienced all of those seats in the gallery here last night full, with people angry about paying increased taxes for important services. And I know that there are people in the community who are challenged with tax increases. I'm not convinced that those are necessarily the majority of those who are objecting. But I want to express that city services are important and in many cases vital. They also provide economic stability in times that are challenging. And I think what we have to do is strike a balance between maintaining services and improving them to the extent that we can, while keeping those services affordable. And I'm comfortable that that balance is being struck with the recommendation before us. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts and your comments on that, Councillor Hillian. And you know, I'm in a similar place to the comments that have been shared. I am quite happy with the report, what's presented. The recommendation makes sense to me. I think the changes that were directed by council leaves us in a much more nimble position going forward for 2026. And we do have a lot of uncertainty in terms of what the financial health of the general economy is going to be going forward. And this budget reduces the taxation in that was proposed previously, but also relies a little bit less on surplus than we were originally looking at. So that makes me feel pretty comfortable with what the recommendation is. I think next year, that 2.5 million of capital that is going to need to be funded from taxation speaks to the fact that we haven't been putting enough money in reserves. And so if we don't start building a little bit of that in and we just go with the lowest amount possible here, we're just kind of compounding that problem. And given the tariff threats and the uncertainty around costs, I think that we need to keep as much flexibility in what we're putting into reserves now, just based on the fact that the cost of replacing and improving and building things is ever changing. So I am pretty happy with what staff have landed on and what we've landed on as a council. So I'll share that. I did have just a couple of questions of clarification around, I'm pretty solid on all the numbers that are provided for 2025, but also, of course, seeing another double-digit increase for next year. I just want to get a little bit of clarity on how refined those numbers are. And one question I had was, the biggest adjustment in this refined budget was actually the reduction of short-term debt in terms of just a more precise figure. The closer you get to the time, the better the number is. And do we default to that 5% number until we get a little more clarity, or are we forecasting a lower short-term debt number for next year as well?
Wonderful question. So I default back to the 5% as it trends towards the long-term average. Yeah. These are the focuses that we come back when we have that budget discussion next fall. As I can say, we forecasted at 5, we're actually only sitting at 2.5 now. Here are the impacts. But I am not comfortable recommending a budget that is, razor thin, that could pose problems into the future that are bigger than we expect.
Yeah, no, I think leaving at the 5 makes good sense. I just wanted to clarify, because some of these changes we built in going forward, like the reduction of a staffing position, but I just wanted to be clear that we're just using 3.8% for this year because we know that that's what the number is. So yeah, that makes good sense to me. And then you did clarify, but I think you did confirm this, that the things that are pushed ahead are now pushed ahead in these projected numbers, and the positions that were removed are in fact removed going forward. So it is reflective of the actual changes.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for that. So I don't see any lights on, so I think we're ready to move ahead with the recommendation here. Someone wants to move it. Moved by Hillian. No, seconded by Cole Hamilton. Is there any discussion on that? Oh, I'm looking at you, but your mic's not on. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks for that. No, I think there was some contemplation whether we wanted to go a little bit lower at 6.5, but I didn't hear anyone else jump up and down about it, so I'll go along with 7. Thanks for moving that.
Any other comments on that? Seems like we're reaching a point to have a vote here. So all those in favor?
In
Any
favor.
opposed? And that passes unanimously. Okay, moving right along. We're on to bylaws. First, second, and third reading of the 2025 to 2029 financial plan, number 3165, 2025. Moved by Hillian, seconded by Moran. Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
In favor?
And no one's opposed. That passes unanimously. And on to the sewer service frontage bylaw number 3170. Moved by Moran, seconded by Frisch. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor?
In
Any
favor?
opposed? And that passes unanimously. Okay, and on to bylaws for adoption, our fees and charges, amendment bylaw number 3175, solid waste. Moved by Moran, seconded by Hillian. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
In
Any
favor?
opposed? And that's carried unanimously. And moving on to council reports. Maybe I'll ask if anyone would like to do a council report instead of going around the table. And I don't see any lights on. I'm looking at you, Mayor Wells, because you usually have something. But I'll let you pass
I'll
to
maybe
me.
just give a shout out to all those that showed up for coldest night of the year on Saturday.
Thanks for that. Did you want to do a report direct to Councillor Moran? Go ahead.
No, not a report, but I realized a few of us are wearing pink shirts today, and I don't think we brought that up, did we? As far as I know, that it is Pink Shirt Day, as a response to bullying, and hoping that people are wearing their shirts and thinking about bullying behavior, not just today, but every day of the year. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Yes, you're right. We did not make an announcement about that. Maybe we should have. So thanks for bringing that up. And so that brings us up to our late item for the in-camera resolution. So if someone could move that. Is that clear enough? Okay, just making sure we're on track here. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. So I guess we're moving in camera.